Chapter 26. Big Sister Packs a Punch. The Fourth Hell. Dread's Keep. Crinan couldn't stop himself. In unison with every other Black Knight around him, he pulled his sword free from its scabbard and raised it in the air. He didn't cheer or shout like the others did, but the feeling of camaraderie was one of the most overwhelming sensations he had felt in his life. Around him he heard jubilant weeping and cries of joy, and Crinan couldn't help but reflect on that. He didn't know how long he had been in the Hells, but Crinan knew it was nothing compared to many that surrounded him. It was very likely that none of them had felt any sort of hope for a very long time. He was surprised any of them were still even able to process a coherent thought, and couldn't imagine the joy that pulsed through their hearts.
"Let your helplessness be only a memory," Zywin cried out. "One that fuels you to never bow again. We are the free ones. Join me, Black Knight Seraphim, and let us take Dread's Keep." Another round of cheering, and Zywin began walking. In life, Crinan would have scoffed at the sight of the young elf leading an army, but in the Hells, Crinan knew better. Zywin Phoenix had died long before Crinan was born. He was far Crinan's superior, and Crinan recognized that fact. Torches were lit and weapons were equipped as the army moved away from their camp and toward the ledge that Crinan had previously been told about. He was eager to see the keep, and so he marched forward with the army.
"Infantry on me!"
Vasily Immel shouted.
"Today we show Golvia who is real demon!"
"Siege engineers, to the catapults!"
Tau Harn, another fallen commander, yelled.
"I need a shield wall in front of them, Commander Vasily."
"You heard Commander Tau,"
Vasily said to his troops.
"Follow me to catapults."
Crinan reached the ridge and stopped as he looked down into the valley below. Centered perfectly on the bare, burned land was a tall black castle with walls surrounding it on all sides. He could just barely see into the courtyard from where he stood and watched the players within mill about. He saw glowing armor, flaming swords, and a number of torches.
"We have only our strength and experience to get us through this fight,"
Sir Edmund said as he walked up behind Crinan and placed a hand on his shoulder.
"And of course, our hearts."
Crinan nodded, feeling a sense of comfort in his former teacher's presence. Edmund's hand slid off of Crinan's shoulder, and he stepped up to his side.
"I am grateful that the brothers saw fit to reunite us,"
he said, staring forward at the keep below.
"I hope you understand that despite my harshness with you in life, I cared for you deeply, Crinan. I never bore children. I like to think of you as my own."
"Weird," Crinan replied. Sir Edmund snorted a laugh and placed his hands on his hips.
"I appreciate the fact that you haven't changed," Edmund said, "but I also see much growth in you. Your eyes, they tell a story of a person who is way too old for his age. They are a warrior's eyes."
"I've seen some shit," Crinan said. "I've done even worse shit."
"We all have, Crinan," Edmund said. "What you do, however, does not define who you are. Only you can do that. Either you stay weak and allow your pain and rage to dominate your heart and mind, or you grow through it. You mature, and you choose who you want to be."
Edmund reached up and patted Crinan's back.
"I look forward to fighting alongside you as an equal, Sir Crinan."
The knight dropped his hand and proceeded down the incline toward the battlements. Being considered an equal by the elven knight whom Crinan had revered and respected so much in his youth sent a cold flash through his body. He watched Edmund walk away and couldn't help but reflect on his words. He was glad he could make his teacher proud and excited to show him what he was capable of. As Crinan moved to follow the knight, however, he was stopped by the words of Dolly calling out to him.
"It seems that when one is around you, they never lack in excitement."
Dolly's voice was the same, but her inflection had changed a bit. Crinan thought this odd, but didn't pay it any mind. She was most likely crazy from her time in the Hells. He wouldn't put it past the fairest to be harboring a number of different voices and personalities.
"Tell me about it," Crinan snorted in response. I couldn't have a normal day even if I wanted to.
An organized Black Knight rebellion in the hells.
Dolly chuckled as she shook her head.
I never thought I would see anything like it.
Crinan looked over at the Ferris and scrunched up his face in confusion. Aren't you too old to know what Black Knight even is? Crinan asked. Like, didn't you die during the Sin Wars?
Dolly did,
she answered flatly.
But as you won't be surprised to hear, Crinan Jameson, not everything in the hells is as it seems.
Crinan raised a brow as Dolly turned toward him. A second personality wasn't supposed to know about things that they hadn't heard of. The idea of a person who had died in ancient times knowing about Black Knight didn't make sense to him. So you're touched? He asked.
Hardly,
Dolly replied with a smirk.
I mean, perhaps a bit on the crazy side, but not in the way you speak of. Tell me, Crinan, do you recall how Saginius Lynx speaks to you from time to time?
I know that he does, Crinan said. He looked Dolly up and down, trying to figure her out. He had never told her Sage's full name. How did she know so much? I don't know how he does it, though.
That's not what I was asking, but sure,
Dolly continued.
Well, Sage is not the only one who can log into the hells without a pod.
A pod, Crinan repeated. He had heard the term used in relation to players logging into the hells from the real world, but he didn't know the specifics of it.
Yes, a Farseer tech hell pod. It's a large egg-shaped device that people sit in to connect to the hells. Every family in Govia has at least one.
Dolly's consistent references to the modern era were causing Crinan to grow suspicious. He took a step away from her and gently placed a hand on the grip of his pistol. Who are you? He asked suspiciously.
While you are mildly dim, one cannot accuse you of not being observant. Before I answer that question, however, I need you to promise me that you will not do anything rash.
Dolly replied.
Can you make that promise to me?
Nope, Crinan replied flatly. Dolly smirked and shook her head at Crinan's response.
I should have expected that. Forgive me, Crinan.
Dolly looked up at the dark sky overhead and pursed her lips together. She was silent for a moment, as if she was considering her words.
I am Bishop General Saracen Fear. I am using this body to help you, Crinan Jameson.
In a flash, Crinan's revolver was free from its holster and the barrel was pressed against Dolly's temple. You're fucking dead, Crinan growled. Dolly grinned and held her palm toward Crinan's feet, and then promptly blasted the ground beneath him with an unseen power. He tumbled to the ground awkwardly and raised his weapon again, but Dolly was no longer there.
You need to let me finish,
Dolly whispered into Crinan's ear from behind him.
There is more for you to hear.
Like hells! Crinan shouted as he quickly got to his feet. He spun to face where he thought Dolly was, but again was met with empty air. Quit jumping around! Crinan yelled. A hand snatched out, grabbing Crinan's pistol and ripped it free from his grip. Crinan reached for the other, but a leg swooped beneath him, kicking hard against the back of his knees. He lost his balance and tumbled to his ass.
I am not here to stop you, Crinan,
Dolly softly called out.
I am here to help you.
Well, that doesn't make any fucking sense, Crinan spat back, again reaching for his second pistol. Dolly hooked her arms under his armpits and lifted, and then promptly locked her legs around his belly.
Stop fighting,
Dolly said.
Let me finish.
How are you? Crinan grunted as he tried to move. How are you so strong? With all his might, Crinan reached forward, and Dolly slammed her forehead against the back of Crinan's head. Ow! Crinan yelped. Fucking stop!
You stop resisting,
Dolly repeated. Yeah, right! Crinan tried to move again, and Dolly bit down on his hair and jerked her head to the side, ripping a chunk free. Crinan shrieked, and Dolly released him. She turned her head to the side and spit his hair out, and then moved so that she was behind him and pushed him to the ground, pressing firmly against the back of his neck with her knee.
I'm not here to stop you,
Dolly harshly repeated.
Just listen to me, you stubborn idiot.
Fine, Crinan gasped, tapping the ground in front of him with his hand. I can't breathe. Dolly pulled her knee away and took hold of Crinan's upper arm, pulling him up. She looked over at a group of black knights that were watching and smiled sweetly at them.
Just warming up for the battle,
she called out.
All is well.
The knights laughed and then hurried to the battlements. You didn't need to be so rough, Crinan whined as he dusted himself off.
You do not need to be so weak,
Dolly replied.
Let's call it payback for when you took the wheel off my bicycle so long ago.
Crinan looked up at her and squinted his eyes, a memory immediately coming to the forefront of his mind. He saw Sarah, his elder sister from so long ago. She was crying because she couldn't ride her bicycle after Crinan took the front wheel off because he was a shithead. Crinan recalled a prompt ass-beating from his mother and a smug look of satisfaction on Sarah's face. I don't fucking know you, Saracen Fear, he growled, and I doubt you get around on a bicycle.
You do not know me anymore,
Dolly said, stepping forward. She poked him in his sternum, and he took a step back in response.
But you used to.
Sarah had disappeared when Crinan was young. He remembered being home on leave from the academy for the holidays. She left after pizza with the family one night to give birth to a child she was carrying and never returning. Sarah was 16 years old at the time, 16 and pregnant. He remembered his frantic parents nearly destroying the house with worry over the disappearance of their only daughter. You're fucking with me. Crinan shook his head and scowled. Sarah is dead. She's been dead for 14 years. Dolly silently nodded at that comment.
Sarah,
she whispered.
Yes. Sarah died a long time ago, little brother. I am all that's left of her. But that does not matter right now. I am your sister, Crinan. Reuben, Kirsten, Chris. I'm sister to them all, and I have come here to help you.
No fucking way. Crinan shook his head. You can't be. You just have good information. You know too much about my family. Sarah is dead.
Repeating something does not make it true, brother,
Dolly said, stepping forward.
Trust me, I know that fact all too well.
What color's your hair? Crinan asked.
Red,
she replied. What was the name of my dog Kirsten ran over when I was a kid?
King Cabbage.
What was the nickname you had for Reuben?
Ruby.
What's my birthday?
The 10th of Sidra.
Who are you named after?
Father's sister.
Holy shit, Crinan finally gasped. He looked into her eyes and felt a pang of nostalgia. Sarah?
Yeah, booby,
Dolly said softly.
It really is me.
This is like, Crinan said, shaking his head, the worst fucking news I've ever gotten. You're Bishop General Saracen? He could feel his face growing red. You joined the fucking Empire? You...
Crinan, stop.
Dolly shook her head and reached out, grabbing his arm.
That's not what is important right now. What matters right now is getting you to where you need to go.
No, it does fucking matter, Sarah, Crinan snarled. You kill people like me. You kill Black Knights. I heard about what you did at the Galaki Islands. I heard about the massacre.
It's no different from what you Centurions did in Marask.
Dolly snapped back.
I heard about the decimation of the camp, how hundreds of civilians died in the fire.
Crinan paused and flared his nostrils. We're fighting for freedom. You're fighting to enslave.
Yet innocents die either way, Crinan,
Dolly replied.
This is the way of things. Do you think the civilians care whose hand they die by? Do you think they care about the freedom you fight oh so valiantly for if it leaves them dead at the end of the day? They piss on your efforts. They would rather be my slave than your casualty.
Crinan fell silent, and he looked away. Dolly released her grip on his arm.
There are no good sides in this war, booby,
she said sadly.
I have many regrets. There is much that plagues me, Crinan. I lay awake at night thinking of the lives who've been lost or ruined because of my actions, just as I imagine you do. but we do what we must to survive. I am not here to justify or defend my actions to you, Krynen. I am here to help you as much as I can. I want you back in this world. Sagenius Lynx has given an opportunity to achieve that. I will do everything I can to help you get back home.
How do you know about Sage? Krynen asked, turning to Dolly. Who else knows?
Nobody,
Dolly replied firmly.
I am the one preventing the Empire from learning fully of his activities. He does not know I am there, but I am masking his presence. I do not know how long I can do it, though. We must get you out of the hells as soon as we can.
Fine, Krynen conceded. But when I get out, don't expect me to give you a big happy hug or anything. You're still who you've become, and if I see you on the battlefield, I'll kill you.
Of course, brother,
Dolly said.
And for now, while I have time, let's get you to the battle below so we can unlock the 5th level.